Good morning, feisty people. Welcome to the second part in our series about how to coach young athletes here on the Feisty Performance Podcast. And back with me today, I have Jill Colangelo, researcher at Byrne University. And today, Jill, we're talking specifically to a coach, but we're also talking about coaching young athletes and young women in particular. And some of the things that I know we're going to talk about during this episode, these are questions that we get all the time from coaches, from parents. How do I talk to my daughter about her period? How do I ask her if she even has a period? How do I talk about eating disorders and body image? So we're going to just kind of today try to provide as many practical answers as we can.
Yes, we are. We're going to dive into all of it. It's so important because I don't know about you, but back when I was a young athlete, these conversations didn't even come up, let alone were coaches wondering how to address them. They just were not happening. And so it is a really important aspect of overall athlete health. It is overlooked. It is something that we are not necessarily prepared to talk about all the time, but it is an integral part of sport performance, specifically for young athletes. So we're going to get into that today.
For sure. There's it's an interesting intersection, right? You have cultural pieces around body image, but you also have physiology around changing bodies and how we talk about that and how it's related to performance. I understand why people and male coaches in particular might be hesitant to bring that up with a young woman, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you haven't listened to the first part in our series, you're diving in here in the second part. So last week, we actually had an episode about athletes themselves, and we also talked to a young athlete too. So check that out if you haven't listened to that.
Yeah, it's such a good episode. This Sara is such a great, she was so forthcoming. I was so happy to hear her perspective on this.
She was, yeah. So tell us a bit about Jason.
Yeah, so we have a real gem of a coach, honestly. Such a great guy, doing great things. He is Jason Russo. He has been a coach since 2001. 24 years of coaching with girls teams specifically, but cross country and track. He is at Haddonfield Memorial High School in New Jersey, and he's been the head coach there since 2007. He is someone who is, like I said, he's someone who's doing it right. He really made it a priority to look into what he needed to do as a coach to move toward having these conversations in a real productive way on his team. First question I wanted to ask you is, what in the process of your coaching journey, what have you learned about deciding to advocate for particularly female athlete health?
Goodness, I feel like I've learned so much just in particular in the last 5 to 10 years. One of the biggest things that I think I've learned is just the importance of communication and being able to communicate with my athletes, not just about the sport itself, but in particular, their preparation, how they feel things are going, their health, just opening those doors of conversation. You know, it was something that early in my career, I felt like I was aware of. I was aware of the issues of low iron, aware of the issues of low ferritin, the issues of eating disorder. Those were all things I was aware of, but they were not things that we actively talked about at practice. It was not something that I actively talked about one-to-one with my athletes. And some of the big things that kind of changed that, I mean, it became very much in my face of like, this is happening on your team. And that was just so upsetting to me that it was happening with one of my athletes that was really brave enough with her mom to come and say like, listen, we want to talk about this and kind of just push me into it, not push me into it, but led me into it, you know? And I think that was important, is that kind of helped me get into it, and having those conversations with that athlete sparked having conversations with more athletes and having conversation with the group and making it just more normal to talk about things of like, when you're getting your period or if you're not, and what are some things that you should be concerned with, and inviting other people into our group, into our team to talk about these and share their expertise with the team members. And, you know, not just having that person share with the team, but having them share with us as coaches, to be there, to learn, to listen, to be a part of it. again, I go back to that idea that, since we've started talking more and more about it, it's just become more normal. It's become more athletes that have come up and said, I haven't had my period in this long. To my ignorance, I guess, my failure to have those conversations early on in my career, I just didn't realize how often it was happening. And now it's just, I realize how big of an issue it is and can be, especially when it's not something that you're talking about and your athletes are not realizing like this is not normal. This is not what it should be like. This is something that we should address or I may need help addressing. And my coach may need to be a part of the communication with regards to, hey, I'm going through this. Can you help me get through this? Can you help my training? It's going to be okay if the workout that was scheduled for Wednesday can't be run Wednesday because I'm just not having a good day or I'm not having a good week. And I think just that's all a part of just the communication with the athletes, the normalizing those talks and just realizing like this should be a part of it, and if it's not a part of it now, it has to be a part of their training and their career and their journey in running. Even if they're not going to run collegiately, they hope to run later on in life. And if they're going to run later on in life, this is something that they need to build now. Just that idea of communication and talking about what's going on and getting the support and the help that they need to do it in a healthy manner that's going to best allow them to run for life. And the other thing is it's not just about the athletes. I said it was about the coaches too, but I think it's also about the parents. I think it's about the loved ones at home that these athletes are going to, that they also are aware of the things that their daughters are going through and the issues that may exist, so that they can also support and help their daughters through this, navigate the endurance sports in high school.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting because I'm imagining when you're coming out to start being a coach, you're thinking, all right, I'm coaching a sport. I'm going through best practices of sport performance. I'm trying to keep my athletes healthy. I'm thinking about how to get them strong, but I'm imagining that it wasn't really top of mind for you to think about how to talk to young women about their menstrual cycle. I'm sure that wasn't really on your bingo card, as they say, right?
No way.
Right.
No way.
And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you is because you are a male coach who is in that position where they've got to broach topics that may be somewhat difficult or somewhat awkward, or in our society today, maybe there's some concern or stigma around those conversations. And I was hoping that you could maybe talk to me about what are the ways that you do that mechanically? What are some best practices around the conversations? When do you start having them in a season? Who's there when you have them? How do you create that open dialogue without being concerned about sort of how those conversations are construed or framed?
I think some of the things that we've done, because to be honest with you, when we started the practice of having someone come in and speak to our team, one of our first concerns was like, we need the parents to be aware. We need the parents to be aware that someone is going to come and have a conversation with their daughters. And that might upset some of them. They might go home, in tears and saying like, oh my gosh, I think I have an issue. I think I need help. So one of the first things that we started doing is we always have a preseason meeting with our parents. The athletes come, but they're kind of like, they eat with the whole group. They eat with the parents. They eat together, but the athletes kind of disappear. And we as coaches have an opportunity to talk about, our expectations for the season. But what we also talk about is the idea that we are going to have someone, an expert, come in and speak to the girls about the issues that they're most likely facing with regards to eating, training in a healthy way, their own mental health, the struggles of comparison with social media. So we have that conversation with the parents, and I'll never forget the first time I stood in front of the parents having that conversation. I'm very fortunate to have an assistant coach who is a strong female runner, runs recreationally still. So she was there with me as an assistant. And I said to her up front, I said, I need you there. I need you there for this meeting. and I need you to jump in if need be. But we talked with the parents about it. And I think we did a really good job of explaining to them that this is not about your daughters being better cross-country runners. This is not about them being better track and field athletes. This is about them being healthy young women that are going to be able to pursue running, if they'd like to, for a very long time in a healthy fashion, not just without the injuries, but without the complications that could come on later in life, and without the emotional toll that some of these things may take on them. And I think the parents were so receptive of it that first time I remember talking to my assistant afterwards, I said, how do you think that went? And she said, it was great. And there are always going to be some parents that kind of, they make the eyes or they look the other way, and they're probably thinking, like all of us do at some point, like, not my kids. And that's okay. That's okay that they feel that way. I mean, it's not okay. But from my perspective as a coach, it doesn't matter that they're responding that way. What matters is all of the parents that were meeting my eyes and kind of nodding along and like writing some stuff down. And I felt like a lot of the parents just were like, okay, like this is something that I need to be prepared to talk to my daughter about at home. So be aware that night or the next couple of days that they might have something to come home and talk to you about. And I think that transparency really helped them to realize that we were just looking out for the best interest of their daughters. We were caring, compassionate coaches that just wanted to do best by them. So that was the big thing. Then just following up, it starts with whole group conversations. At the beginning of our practice, we're typically stretching together as a team, and they like to do a little bit of dynamic stretching, but then they also like to do some static stretching. We sit in a circle, and it's also a great time for them to catch up. And it's a great time for us to say, hey, what did you guys think about the conversation with Jill yesterday? What did you learn? What is something that stood out to you? And kind of share. So normalizing that conversation as a whole group, asking them to give advice to each other in large part, this past fall, some of our seniors did a great job of saying, within the group, here's something that I do that really helps me, or here's something I say when I'm sitting at the lunch table and my friends are looking at how much I'm eating and saying like, wow, you're eating a lot. Here's my response to them. So normalizing that conversation as a whole group. And I think what that in turn does is our athletes are more comfortable maybe later on coming up to myself, or I said my assistant coach is a female. So they're more comfortable coming up to us and saying, hey, I think I need some advice on this. I'm feeling kind of weak. I'm not sure if I'm eating enough. Can I talk to you guys about what I'm eating and what you think? We certainly, have an understanding between my assistant Katie and I that like sometimes she'll say like, I got this, the girls will come over and they'll go, discreetly to her about something probably period related. And that's okay. I don't need to be a part of that one-to-one conversation. She's very comfortable and can have that conversation with them. But there are some times that they come to both of us and they have that conversation. And I think for anybody that is nervous about them having that conversation, having your assistant there with you helps, and it doesn't have to be female, but just having someone else there with you, can make it more comfortable for you. And I think can also make it more comfortable for the athlete that instead of just talking one-to-one with someone, they're talking with a group of individuals that can offer them some advice and support. And I think, that's the other thing is sometimes they're asking me something and I'll say, you know what, I appreciate the fact that you asked me, but I think Coach Katie's going to be better at answering this. So let's go to Katie and see what she says. Or I might say, is this something that I can refer to our trainer? Do you feel comfortable if I talk to the trainer about this? Can I walk you down to our trainer? Can I walk you to our nurse? Can we talk to our nurse about it? So I think just using your resources, right? Just, it doesn't have to be just you, but that idea of opening those lines of conversation and having ways to support them is huge. Like just not just kind of like listening and saying, okay, all right, talk to mom and dad about that at home. Just, helping them at school, because they may not feel comfortable talking to mom and dad at home, or there may be practices at home that for whatever reason are not best for them. And just, they're getting more support at school than they are at home. So I think those are some of the things that we've done that now it's just normal. It's just, it's not as weird. That's a terrible word for it, but it was.
Everyone is afraid that there's going to be some kind of trade-off. I've had coaches say, well, we're not in the business of rest days. We're in the business of championships. And while I find that incredibly ignorant, I understand the inclination, because back in the day, everyone really assumed that lighter bodies were faster bodies, and coaches were willing to overlook a lot of things that should have been paid attention to in order to have, get their runners on a podium, right? And to win championships. What do you think some of the myths that you've seen busted? Do you still see them perpetuated around you?
Sadly, I do still see them. I know I was very guilty of when I started my career. It's like more was better. How do we run 60 miles a week? How do we get in more run? How do we get in more time on our feet? And I'll never forget, probably about 10 years into my career, there was a winter where I lost literally all but one member of my varsity team in cross country to an injury of some sort. And I looked back at what we did in the fall, and we had a great fall, but I looked at what we did and I said, oh my God, if it's one kid, there might be an issue, but when it's all of the kids, that's me. That's a training issue. And we had just done too much. And and it's this idea of like, running more is going to lead to better performances. And maybe to some degree that might be a little bit true, but it's also going to lead you down the road where it's like, well, what do you do next? I mean, if you're running so much in high school, what are you then going to run in college and beyond? Not to mention the fact that I am in a high school that we very much are a competitive academic and athletic high school. And our athletes are just phenomenal students as well. And they're doing so much. I can't be asking them in my right mind to spend 2+ hours at practice with, an hour plus running every day, and then still be able to get home and put in the work that they need to put in for school and be successful students and be high school students. I mean, they're still high school students. They're kids. They need to have lives outside of running. I forget where I heard it. I think it might have been at one of the Wildwood clinics, but there was something that stuck out to me a lot. This idea of like, you have playing cards in your hand, and one of those playing cards is that you're a runner. And if that's the only playing card you have in your hand, when you can't run, you're like, oh my God, what am I going to do? So, we really emphasize, like, you need to have multiple playing cards in your hand. It can't just be, I'm a runner. It needs to be, I'm a runner. I like to read books. I like to, take part in this club. I really like math. Like, there need to be other things in your hand so that maybe you can run, but running's just not going well for some reason or another right now. So you have these other things that you can rely on and still be happy with. Well, these other things are going well. So it's okay that the running's not going well right now. It'll come along. So that's kind of another one of like, more is better. No, I don't think more is better, but also like committing fully to running. Like running needs to be at the top of your pyramid. I don't think so. I think that running should be a part of your pyramid with some other things that you're also really enjoying doing. Because running is not always going to go well. Honestly, I mean, there's going to be a point where it's not going well and you need to have some other things that are still making you happy. Otherwise, it just gets to be like this really vicious cycle. And then the third one, and this is so sad. It really, really is. And it breaks my heart when I see it. But I still think there's this idea that skinny is better. And I think it's awful. I can't. I mean, it gives me a sick feeling to my stomach when I see a runner who I look at and I go, oh my gosh, she doesn't look healthy. Or if they're looking at people on social media and they're like, did you see how skinny she is, Coach Russo? And I'm like, yeah. I think that being strong is better. Being fit is better. Being healthy is better. Not just this idea of like, I need to find a way to get skinny. I'm going to run faster if I'm skinny. Like I hate that myth. And I think it's coming, it's changing, but not fast enough.
Yeah.
Hey, feisty people. CEO Sara Gross here. I want to tell you about my favorite product for muscle strength and recovery, which has also become a favorite amongst all of my friends at CrossFit, Prevenex's Muscle Health Plus. A few months ago, I started using it during my lifting sessions. We call it red juice at CrossFit, and it has helped my power, speed, and I've even put on some muscle mass, which has typically been really, really hard for me as an ex-endurance athlete. Muscle Health Plus contains creatine monohydrate, of course, but it also contains branched-chain amino acids and essential amino acids, plus some even more cutting-edge ingredients like HMB and estrogen, all of which are scientifically shown to increase muscle growth, recovery, and strength. So basically, it's a convenient, all-in-one formula that goes way beyond creatine alone. Unlike most supplement brands, Prevenex tests everything with pharmaceutical-grade precision, and they also offer a 100% money-back guarantee. Try Muscle Health Plus today, and you can get 15% off your first order with the code PERFORMANCE at Prevenex.com. That's PERFORMANCE for 15% off at Prevenex.com.
So pretty great stuff from Jason, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. He was amazing. I love, like he said it himself near the end, and I think you repeated it there, like, don't pretend to be the expert. I really appreciated his humility that was combined with kind of really making an honest effort to help. And actually along the way, clearly he had learned how to manage the kind of, I think, potentially awkward situation of talking to his team about topics that are difficult to talk about sometimes. So I just feel like he was doing such a great job. And he said that one of the things he said was to bring in experts, outside experts. And then he mentioned that you had been his outside expert. And that just really made me wonder, what did you talk to the girls about?
Yeah, I love getting to talk to teams, particularly young, sort of high school age teams. It is a great opportunity to give them some information that they are likely to get in a biology class, but who is paying attention to that? No one. And it's a little bit of anatomy and physiology. It's a little bit of myth busting. It's a little bit of let's understand how our body works. But I tried to do that in the context of the real world, right? And I talked to them about some of the pressures that they might be feeling, some of the noise they might be taking in from social media or influencers or things that have to do with body image. We really get into the nitty-gritty of looking at examples from social media of people to not follow, and even looking at some of the food choices and the fueling choices that they might be making or might be considering making. We cover a spectrum of topics because their lives are complicated, and I try to make it as useful to them as possible, keeping in mind all the things that they might be confronted with as young athletes.
Yeah, you said when we were chatting before the show, you said you showed them pictures from social media of just like the types of bodies that people, that people are presenting on social, and kind of trying to break that down for like this is aesthetic versus this is what performance might look like. So tell us a bit about how you do that and the response from the girls.
Yeah, so I take sort of screenshots of different fitness influencers, especially the ones that I know that they're looking at, that they're find most compelling for various reasons. And,
how do you know, who those are? Do you ask them?
Yeah, so in some cases, I will do a little bit of recon of time in Instagram. Yeah. Someone who's kind of younger, sort of things that they're looking at, or the things that their friends are looking at, or kind of drawing their attention to. Or you can kind of just gather some of what the chatter is out there, especially when it comes to like celebrities or really well-known influencers.
Yeah, and sorry, I cut you off, so we'll definitely continue with what you were saying, but like I'm curious about this because I feel like in the zeitgeist right now, the way that influencers are showing themselves is changing a little bit. Like, I feel like there's a trend more towards like stronger bodies versus the skinny aesthetic that I used to see as a young person. Did you find that to be true, or is that just like my world and my algorithm?
I think it might be your algorithm, being honest.
Okay.
I would love to tell you that we have kind of moved past the, lean body, skinny body aesthetic being preferred. And I know that for a while there, it seemed like the pendulum was swinging the other way, and we were looking at fuller bodies and stronger bodies and athletic bodies. And I think there's definitely a lot of that out there. There's lots of people sharing a positive message. I don't want to discount any of that. However, I do think there are pieces and pockets of the world where there is this perfect girl aesthetic out there, and perfect in air quotes, of course. There's no such thing as perfect, but where there is a particular athletic body type that isn't what you and I are thinking. It's this real slim, real fashiony person who looks kind of like an Instagram filter walking all the time. It's a very, I would say, unrealistic image of what fitness looks like or what athletics look like. And I hate to say it, but across different sport types, so not just the running and endurance sports, but also sports like tennis, even golf. I mean, I've seen it in many different areas. There's this aesthetic look that seems to always be an undercurrent. Like you'll see that, the strong women, lifting massive weights and doing their thing, but there is quite a lot of the impossibly perfect, very thin, very perfect looking fitness influencers still out there.
I was actually reflecting on this morning, just not even related to coming and talk to you about this, but how the reality of athletic bodies and the way that I used to see things online when I was young is two completely different things. And so I'm saying something really obvious there, but I was thinking about how, a lot of my friends when I was a pro athlete we were lean because of the training we were doing. That lean kind of means lean everywhere.
Yes.
If you're lean.
Yes.
So the combination of having ripped abs and also having boobs and hips, in a feminine, is it's the rare individual who actually looks like that. So I think even when you are lean for performance reasons, those bodies don't look like the aesthetic either. Does that make sense? They don't necessarily fit the feminine ideals.
Yes.
And so it's very complicated and no matter which way you look at it, it's not real.
It's not real. However, you can look at who is competing in any given week in track and field and see that there is a definite body type there. And the girls who are on the track teams, on the cross country teams in high schools, they cannot look at that and say, well, that's an anomaly, because it's not. And so it's,
right.
It's ubiquitous. That is the look. And they don't really have much context for what's happening there. And if you ask my opinion, I think that a lot of us have lost the idea that there's context, or there should be context when we're looking at those bodies. And not all of it is very clear by just looking at a picture, right? And so that's where it becomes really complex and complicated for them. They are looking at these images and equating them with, as I said in the previous episode, they're looking at these images and equating it with achievement. They're equating it with success in a way that is incredibly difficult to unravel for them. It is hard to tell a young woman that you can be strong and successful and perform well at any weight, and then they're looking to see who's competing and they're getting a different message.
So this is such a great point. I'm so glad this came up. How do you bridge that gap, or what do you tell them? Because I think there is a reality that a lot of young people might feel like you're lying to them if they're aiming to be, say they're trying to get an NCAA scholarship and they run the 800 meters and they're watching TV and they see that a woman who runs the 800 meters at a high level, her body type fits into this, I'm literally drawing a box on my desk right now. And so how do you talk to them about that and help them set realistic goals and help them understand what's going on there?
Well, first, I try to educate athletes to understand that what they're seeing in a photograph or even in a video, it's not necessarily reality, in the sense that it's not telling you anything. Someone's athletic success, let's say in that moment, they won that race. It doesn't tell you anything about what's going on in their life. It doesn't tell you anything about who they are as a person. It doesn't tell you anything about what they've done to achieve that. And while there may be some athletes out there who are naturally able to have a normal period that happens in the right amount of time every single month, and eat adequately, and never get a stress fracture, and never break down physically, those athletes may be out there. But there's a significant portion of athletes who look the way they're looking, who are not able to do any of that, who do get injured, who do have amenorrhea, who do have eating disorders or disordered eating. It is this not spoken about very often true fact of some sports. And again, like I said, I want to give all the space in the world for there to be athletes who defy that. But it is not always the case that one can remain healthy. And when I say healthy, I'm talking about, ovulating, getting a period, good mental health, all this stuff. It is not always possible that an athlete, particularly a female athlete, can do all of those things and achieve those times and everything kind of all happen at the same time. It doesn't. And that's the reality. And I think for young athletes, they begin to think that they have to have that in order for them to be successful in life. And my real goal is to let them know that while that could be your pathway, that is not your only pathway. And if what you have to do to get even close to that is hurting you physically or mentally, it is not worth it, because you are so much more important than any of that. You are the thing that matters. So let's focus on what it takes to keep you healthy. And if those numbers happen and if you achieve that, that's great. But if you have to hurt yourself to get there, we're not on board with that. That's not happening.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I also, this comes from experience as well as as an Ironman athlete, like bodies change over time, right? So like, especially when you're in puberty or you're just out of puberty, like when you're in your teenage years or early 20s, right? Your body looks a certain way. If you love running that much and you want to be an elite athlete and you're dedicating all of that time, if you keep yourself healthy, first of all, you're going to have an advantage over 99% of people, because it is really, really hard to stay injury-free in a lot of endurance sports, right? So keep yourself menstruating, keep yourself healthy. And over time, your body does adapt. Like, I think there's this I think a lot of people, and I certainly felt this, feel like there's this pressure to go, oh, I need to look like this elite athlete who's world champion tomorrow, or else I can't make it. Or, I need to look like that by my next race or next season. And that's simply not true. I remember having a time with one of my early training partners when I was still working on my PhD, but I'd first started racing in the pro division at Ironman. And she was a dietitian and a nutritionist, and she was also training for Ironman. And I remember saying to her, taking a picture of the woman who won the Ironman World Championship that year, who honestly later was busted for doping. So there's other reasons she looks so lean and cut.
There's that.
There's that. But I think that triathlon's still pretty clean. Anyway, I showed her this picture and I was like, but I don't look anything like this. Like, this is like us being friends talking. I don't look anything like this. Like, and she's like, actually, Sarah, you're a lot closer than you think. Because she was like, listen, she's at the end of a 9-hour race. She's completely dehydrated, right? She's in at the peak of her season. Like, this is not, by the time you get there, you're going to look a lot closer to that than you currently think. And she was absolutely right about that. And yeah, I just think it's important to remember all of those things, that things change over time, and staying healthy just is this giant trump card.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I'm actually glad you brought that up, because when we talk about coaching and we talk about how to manage someone going through a season, it is not, and we have this idea that we are supposed to, for example, like that shredded, dehydrated look that you're talking about.
Right.
That's not to be your 365 look. That's not supposed to be how you look every day. And I would say this for male athletes and female athletes. The idea that we're supposed to achieve a certain level of, let's say, volume, intensity, mileage, whatever it is, the benchmark, plus this like super lean body that's going to go really fast. We achieve that, and then we're supposed to hold it for 12 months out of the year. That's not how it works. We're supposed to have an off season, but why do we not have an off season? Why do we not allow for those fluctuations? It's because culturally, we do not accept the fluctuation. Our aesthetic needs overtake our performance needs at that point because we don't want to not look a certain way. That is, to me, the worst. I cannot imagine anything worse than that. Can you imagine you're breaking down as an athlete, not for performance reasons, but because your aesthetic needs, your needs to look a certain way or weigh a certain number, were more important to you than how well you perform? That's heartbreaking. And it's also ridiculous. So, I think going back to someone like Jason, it's so important to instill in athletes from an early age. Why? Because this relationship that they have with the coach is extremely important. And once we can, impart to them the idea that they're going to learn good training practices, hopefully from a good coach. They're going to learn things like rest days and off seasons and, cycling, training, and all these different things. But we're also going to learn some really important things about how to view ourselves when things do go up and down. And we're also going to learn some important things about how important it is to care for our bodies. As I said to you before this, we have studies we have scientific studies that will tell us that the coach-athlete relationship is a really important one. And with that comes a lot of responsibility. The coach has a very distinct influence on the athlete, whether for better or for worse. We have studies that show how that can be a very abusive relationship, and we have studies that show that can be a very positive relationship. So that responsibility is not equally taken on by all coaches. Some would prefer to not have to think of the things that are extremely important for individual athletes because they're concerned about championships and they're concerned about making athletes a success and the team a success. They're not willing to step back and look at the kind of macro picture here of like, wow, this is a person. This is a person who has to, once the season is over, go on and like live a life, go to college, get a job, have a family someday. It's not about what's happening, in the next competition. So it is extremely important that coaches realize that they're not just any other person in the orbit of this athlete. They're just not like a passing person on the street. And according to these studies, they may even have more influence than, say, a parent or a friend sometimes. And it's mind-blowing. And and Sarah's like, she's pointing at me like, I know she wants to
pointing. I was like, this is the thought I was holding.
Yeah,
sorry,
no,
continue.
no.
Just that, like, I was listening to a podcast and I forget what it was, but there was a psychologist explaining that there was this study that showed that the other adults in your child's life are very important to the child, like the idea of self-confidence, self-worth coming through, so, and it made me like rethink how I'm interacting with my own child, and also think about the other adults in her life and how they interact with her. So it definitely, like, just that thought alone, that the other adults in my kid's life are of central importance, it was game changing for me.
It is something that, like I said, if a coach is not willing to take that on and not willing to understand that they have a huge amount of influence, and I don't want to be overly direct here, but if you're a coach who's coaching young women and you don't have conversations with them, or not willing to set them up with someone who will have conversations with them about these issues pertaining to their health and well-being, then you should not be a coach, or you should not be coaching girls, because that's how important this is. You have the opportunity here to really have a big influence, and you've got to be able to step up and do that. So we see here too, in this particular study, actually I sent it to you, which is from 2014, right? We saw that the coaches, even if they could see that the athlete was struggling, they were more reluctant to offer help when their performance was improving.
Right.
Ouch, right? And that is, again, unacceptable. These are people. They are not machines, and we have to treat them that way. Something that I really appreciated about Jason, because he is talking about the fact that he recognizes that he's working with these human beings that are in a fragile state, and that is important. And so we cannot ignore that kind of stuff. We really can't. So I think it's my strong language about you should not be coaching or should not be coaching women. It is backed up by the research and just anecdotally what we see happening. So I can't take it back. Sorry, guys, can't take it back.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Like, there is a responsibility for sure that comes with coaching, and especially coaching young people in general. Yes. If I was a coach listening to this, you know, I was in particular a male coach, but any coach, I think the thing I'm wondering right now is, okay, but how do I talk to my girls or my team about periods? How do I bring up these awkward conversations? Because it's honestly, when I think about it from the athlete side, like if my male coach, when I was, you know, in my teens, early 20s, had been like, so do you have your period? I'd be like, none of your effing business.
Absolutely.
Like, you know, so like, how do we, what's the practical advice for that person who's wondering about all of those related awkward conversations?
Yeah, I'm so glad you threw that in there, because this is absolutely, I am not suggesting that coaches have to go out of their comfort zone and, like you said, start having these random conversations. Certainly not. It doesn't take much to ask someone how they're doing in general, right? We'll start with that. Let's start with recognizing the athlete as a person. Let's ask them how they're doing aside from sports. Let's just check in. How's school? How's it going? Like, are you aware of when they have exams? Are you aware of when they have big tests? Are you aware of, can you see them looking a little bit stressed? Are you able to, you know, offer some words of comfort or encouragement when you see that the athlete looks to be struggling? Let's just start with that, right? But then aside from that, there's really plenty of resources that you can use to have someone who is knowledgeable come and talk to your team. You can do that. I mean, I do it with teams. There's other people I'm sure out there that do it. You can talk to someone who is a registered dietitian and someone who is certified to talk to athletes about nutrition if that's a concern. You can actually, I guarantee you that if you talk to your local eating disorder informed therapist, someone who works with athletes, someone who's local to you, and you speak to that person and ask them to come in and talk to your team, I'm absolutely positive that they would jump at the chance. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but it does have to be something. And I think that offloading that to a woman, offloading that to an expert, there's nothing wrong with that. That is absolutely great. And you're just showing your athlete that you really care. None of us as adults have to be experts in everything. In fact, we shouldn't be. Like, I can't coach like a cross country team. I don't know how to do that. But what I do know how to do is talk to athletes about what it takes to not get hurt and in body and mind, and how to rethink, you know, what our priorities are. That is something that I can do, but I cannot coach a team. So we just have to lean on each other to give these kids the full complement of information, because they really deserve it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I think coaches, typically, they're in coaching for a reason. They have good coaching instincts.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so it's the same as any other thing you need to talk about as a coach with your athletes. Like, use your instincts. Is this a good time? Does the person seem open to talking about this? Do they want to? Are they asking me to talk about it? Like, these are the same things the same kind of, I don't know, rules for play that I use with my own daughter. Like, sometimes she's completely open and she wants to talk about her period and she wants to talk about how things are affecting her, which gives me the opening to say, hey, well, listen, it's, you know, it's different for everyone. Just because you're actually in the bleeding phase doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to feel bad, right? Like, hormonally, that could be a little before that, but it is different for everyone. Like, these kinds of things that if I just came at her with that in a different moment, she would be completely shut down to it.
That's right.
So I do think, like, coaches will have probably even better instincts than me on what those moments are.
For sure. And I think you just said something really important there. There is this aspect of coach education that, unfortunately, we do not have infrastructure to set this up. But I do think, according to some of the research here, there's another study that I sent to you that was talking about an actual program to educate coaches in general on female athlete health. because there seem to be these misconceptions still perpetuated that a young athlete, particularly female, has to look like a certain thing or weigh a certain amount, or that what her body looks like and is completely 100% indicative of what her performance is going to be. And there is this, it's a really old school idea. And, I will say that, my generation and older, this was what we were taught and this is what we believed. And so if you're a coach and you're my age bracket, Gen X, and I would even say maybe some older millennials and above, and you're coaching young women and you still got this kind of mindset in the back of your head, that is going to inform how you coach. And so to be educated and understand something, I didn't even know this myself, I will tell you, until probably I was in my 30s, which is that on day one of your period, where a woman typically feels the worst, it's actually when you may perform the best, because the female sex hormones that tend to interrupt your performance are at their lowest. I didn't know that until I was in my 30s. And these types of little tidbits of information can really be helpful for a coach to kind of reprogram some of that old messaging that's still hanging around since, the old days. So we don't want to call anyone out here. We don't put anyone on the carpet, but information, education is key here, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I'm sort of laughing and smiling to myself because it's like how you said you found out in your 30s about really like how female hormones work around how you feel anyway, generally. And again, it's different for everyone.
Sure.
But, I feel like I found out by oral tradition, which it's a joke that I often make because a lot of like women's health information, that's how it came to me, from like other athletes sharing their experience. So in the later part of my career, and I was also in my 30s at this point, found out from other women athletes around me that actually, like, once you start bleeding, you're probably going to start to feel better and perform better. So if I was coming into a race and I was like, I'm going to get my period, like the thing that I wanted was for it to come just before the race, right?
Yes.
Whereas I think previously I would have assumed that having my period during the race was, that would be terrible. What if I get cramps, etc. But then after that, I learned, and it was absolutely accurate, that like the cramps can be dealt with by a Tylenol or an ibuprofen.
Yes.
And again, this is completely different for everyone. So I'm not like prescribing things, but like that was my experience. Like I could deal with the cramps as an ibuprofen, but I would actually perform on that day, whether that's a training day or a race or whatever.
For sure.
So it came to me by other women, their experiences, and us in real time figuring out how to perform our best.
Right. So imagine if that information that you were taking in was not only incorrect, but could be damaging, and you're a young person.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing, I know we're coming up to time here, but the other thing I want to flag is that there is sometimes when an athlete is losing weight or has lost some weight where you might get a very short performance window, which I think sometimes creates this situation. And I thought in particular of a woman who used to work for me. She's been very open about her story, but she was in a state of like low energy availability and red ass. And she was third in the world in under 23 in triathlon, right? So she had this like amazing performance where she, even though she was under eating, she remembered that. It's like, that's my possibility. And this is what I had to do to get there. I was bronze medal, like in the world. This is amazing. And it took her, not only did she not have any good races after that, but it took her 8 years to recover her health. Right. So, and I don't think this is uncommon. So I think it's super important to remember that one little maybe performance window that you might get if you lose weight is not going to last if you don't do it in a healthy way.
I'm so glad you said that, because I tell my athletes all the time, whether it's the high school athletes that I'm talking to or the individual athletes that I work with on a mentoring basis who are going through a lot of this stuff, it is not a question of if, it is a question of when you will break down if you are underfueling. And by the way, that is intentional or unintentional. It does not matter. It's not if, it's when. And so coaches would do well to remember this when they are overlooking potentially some issues that could be starting or brewing at a young age, that setting these young people up for success should be the primary goal. Never mind championships, never mind all this stuff. I know everyone wants to get into college and gets on a scholarship. I get that. But like, we have a responsibility to put these people into the world in the healthiest possible way. And we're not going to do that if we're prioritizing the stuff that's outdated, antiquated, and only has one goal, and that is getting a championship. We can do better for our kids.
Wow. Amazing. We can do better for our kids. That was the best. I mean, I feel like that, I'm going to call it a rant in a good way, that you just, what just came out of your mouth. That was amazing. So thank you so much.
Thank you. You'll hear me rant very often if I'm on the podcast.
Like a good Jill rant. Yeah. So Jill, before we go, tell us a little bit about what we can expect next week.
Next week, we are going to talk to Keely Henninger. It should be a really fun episode. It's the one that is going to be directed toward the athletes themselves. And she is a professional athlete. She is a trail runner, an ultra marathoner. She's also a medical student right now. And we're going to dive into some kind of true faults. We're going to buff some myths. We're going to talk about our own boneheaded experiences, silly things that we did when we were athletes. So it should be a really informative and fun episode, definitely directed toward the athletes, but we're happy to have the parents and the coaches chime in as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jill.
Thank you.